They ignored me for 2 years, then suddenly came back with a lawyer demanding I sign away a lake house worth over $400,000. What they didn't know was that the one daughter they erased had something they never expected. This revenge story dives deep into family betrayal, emotional drama, and a shocking legal twist that turns everything upside down. I'm Elowen Hartley, and this is how the people who treated me like I was nothing made the biggest mistake of their lives.
Căn
If
cứ
you
vào các
love
bản vẽ
Reddit
này, chúng
style
ta cần điều chỉnh
stories
lịch trình
about
ngay. Đúng,
revenge,
và đừng quên
toxic
cập nhật an
family
toàn lao động.
dynamics,
Tôi sẽ
and
kiểm tra
real
vật
life
tư, mọi người kiểm
drama,
tra lại chi tiết.
this
Tốt,
story will
mọi
keep
thứ phải
you
khớp trên máy
hooked
tính
until
và
the
giấy tờ.
very
Rồi,
end.
bắt đầu thôi.
Watch how one document, one truth, and one moment changed everything they thought they controlled. Chapter 1. The letter they thought would break me. 3 days ago, I was sitting at my kitchen table in Asheville, North Carolina, holding a letter from a law office I had never contacted, reading the same paragraph over and over until it stopped feeling surprising and started feeling familiar. My name is Elowen Hartley. I'm 34 years old, a senior financial analyst at Blue Ridge Logistics, and for the past 2 years, my family has not spoken to me. Not once. No calls, no texts, no holidays. And now they needed my signature. The letter was from Brennan and Doyle, a real estate law firm downtown. It was short, polite, and written in that careful tone that makes everything sound reasonable, even when it isn't. They were asking me to sign a quitclaim deed, giving up any interest I might have in a property at Lake Lure, my grandfather's lake house. A place I hadn't been back to since the night I walked out. There was a 30-day deadline, a signature line already prepared, a return envelope like they were doing me a favor by making it easy. I stared at my name at the bottom of the page, and without thinking, I let out a small laugh. Not because it was funny, because it made perfect sense. They had already decided what I was going to do. I picked up my phone and called the number on the letter. It rang twice before someone answered, calm and efficient. I gave my name and said I was calling about the document. There was a pause, the kind that comes when someone pulls up a file they think they understand. Then she said they were expecting my signature soon, like it was already done, like I was just a formality. I thanked her, hung up, and set my phone down carefully. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about the house. It was about control. I sat there for a while, the morning light coming through the kitchen window, making everything look softer than it really was. Our house sat just outside Asheville, quiet enough to feel like an escape, close enough to still belong. Daniel had insisted on that balance. He was already gone for the day, out working. His business had grown over the past few years, one job at a time, steady and reliable. He built things that worked, that lasted. I used to think that kind of work was simple. Now I understood how rare it was. My eyes moved from the letter to the shelf above the counter. The tackle box was still there. It had been there since the day I moved in, untouched, my grandfather's, Howard Hartley. He passed away in 2018, and after the service, someone handed me that box. I remember holding it, feeling its weight, assuming it was just what it looked like, fishing gear. Old tools, maybe a note, something harmless. I never opened it. At first, because I couldn't. The grief was too close, too sharp. I didn't want to turn something that still felt like him into something final. After that, it just became something I didn't get around to, like a lot of things. I stood up slowly and walked toward it, but before I reached it, my mind slipped back, the way it always did when something real was about to happen. Asheville isn't a big place. People know each other, or at least think they do. My family had always been part of that. We showed up, we volunteered, we made sure people saw us the right way. From the outside, we looked solid. Inside, it was different. My younger sister, Meredith, had always been easy to love, easy to celebrate. Everything she did was worth noticing. I was the one who figured things out, the one who didn't need help, the one they called strong. I used to think that was a compliment. I remember my graduation from UNC Asheville in 2016. I walked across the stage, took my degree, smiled at a camera that wasn't mine, And when it was over, I stood there looking for people I already knew weren't coming. Meredith was moving apartments that weekend. My parents went with her. My father told me later it was just a ceremony. My mother agreed. I nodded like I understood. I told myself it didn't matter. For a long time, I believed that, or at least I tried to. Daniel came into my life a year later. He wasn't part of that world. He didn't care about appearances. He cared about whether something worked, whether it held together. He built his business from nothing, one job at a time, and there was something about that felt real. The first time he met my parents, my father barely hid his opinion. After he left, he told me I was settling, that I could do better. My mother didn't argue. I didn't either. Later, I told Daniel what had been said, watching him carefully. He didn't get angry. He didn't defend himself. He just looked at me and said he didn't need my father's respect. But I did. I didn't understand that then. I do now. I had spent years trying to earn something that was never actually being offered. I came back to the present slowly, standing in my kitchen, the letter still waiting on the table behind me. 30 days, a signature, a decision they thought was already made. I stepped closer to the shelf and rested my hand on the tackle box, feeling the rough surface under my fingers. For a moment, I didn't open it. I just stood there, because suddenly, it didn't feel like a memory anymore. It felt like an answer. They thought this was simple. They thought I would sign. They thought I would make it easy. They didn't know what I had never opened. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure if I did either. I took a breath, slid my fingers under the lid, and began to lift. Chapter 2. The night I walked away. The hinge creaked as the lid opened, and for a moment I almost closed it again. Not because I was scared of what I might find, but because something in me already knew that once I looked, I wouldn't be able to pretend I didn't. I let the lid rest open, my eyes landing on the old fishing lures, the worn metal tools, and then the envelope lying flat at the bottom. My fingers hovered over it, then pulled back. Not yet. I closed the box gently and stepped away, my pulse just a little faster than it should have been, because suddenly I remembered exactly what it felt like the last time I ignored something I shouldn't have. Christmas. 2 years ago. The night everything finally broke. It started the way it always did at my parents' house in Asheville. Lights perfectly arranged, food laid out like it belonged in a magazine, laughter filling the space just a little too loudly. 15 people in the living room, all talking, all smiling, all playing their part. From the outside, we looked like a family that had it together. Inside, it felt like standing in a room where I didn't quite fit anymore. Daniel stood beside me, steady as always, his hand brushing mine just once as we stepped inside. It was enough. Meredith spotted me almost immediately. She crossed the room with that same effortless confidence, smiling like nothing had changed, like the distance between us didn't exist. She hugged me quickly, then pulled back and said she needed to talk to me. Before I could respond, she was already guiding me toward the kitchen. The door closed behind us, cutting off the noise, and the quiet that followed felt heavier than the crowd. She didn't ease into it. She said the boutique was struggling, that inventory was stuck, that cash flow was tight. She said it was temporary, like it would fix itself if she just made it through the next few weeks. Then she asked for $7,500. Just like that. No hesitation. I stood there, letting the number settle, letting everything behind it line up in my head. The late payments I had heard about, the way my father had casually mentioned helping her before, like it was nothing. I asked her how long things had been like this. She avoided the question, said it wasn't a big deal, said she just needed a little help. I asked if she had a plan. She sighed, like I was making things harder than they needed to be. Then she said family was supposed to support each other. That was the moment something in me shifted. Quietly. Completely. I told her, no, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't apologize. I just said it. For a second, she looked at me like she didn't understand what I meant. Then her expression changed. Her eyes filled, her voice cracked, and suddenly it wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a scene. She opened the kitchen door and walked straight back into the living room, tears already falling, her voice shaking as she spoke. She said she couldn't believe I would turn my back on her, that I didn't care about family, that I had changed. Every word landed in the middle of the room. Every conversation stopped. I stood in the doorway, feeling 15 pairs of eyes turned toward me. My father stood up slowly, like he had been waiting for this. He looked at me the way he always did when I disappointed him. He said he couldn't understand how I could be so selfish, how I could refuse to help my own sister when I was doing so well. Like what I had built belonged to them. My mother spoke next, softer, but just as sharp. She said she had been worried about me, that I hadn't been the same since I married Daniel, that maybe I needed help. She said it gently. That didn't make it better. I looked around the room. My Aunt Linda avoided my eyes. Marcus shifted in his seat. Someone near the fireplace pretended to check their phone. No one said anything. No one asked what had actually happened. No one asked why I said no. The silence was louder than anything they could have said. I felt it settle over me, heavy and final. That was the moment I understood something I should have seen years earlier. I wasn't part of this. Not really. I stepped forward, my voice steady in a way that surprised me. I said I wasn't refusing because I didn't care. I was refusing because this wasn't a plan, it was a pattern. My father cut me off before I could finish. He said I was overthinking, that I always did that sometimes you just help family and figure things out later. Like logic didn't apply here, like I was wrong for expecting it to. I glanced at Daniel. He hadn't said a word, but his expression hadn't changed. Calm, clear, not surprised. That was the hardest part. He already knew how this would go. I looked back at my father, then at my mother, then at Meredith, still crying, still waiting for the room to turn completely against me. And I realized it already had. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to prove. I said I wasn't changing my answer. My father shook his head, like he expected better. My mother looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Meredith turned away, already pulling someone else into her side of the story. And just like that, I stopped trying. I walked to the front door, Daniel right behind me, the noise of the room rising again as soon as I stepped out of it. The cold air hit my face, sharp and immediate. I didn't say anything until we were in the car. Then I told him I was done. Not angry in the moment, just done. He nodded once, like he had been waiting for me to say it. We drove away without looking back. After that, things didn't settle. They escalated. My father called relatives, telling his version of what happened. My mother spoke to people at church, framing it as concern. I heard about it from people I barely knew. A woman asked me if I was okay, if I had someone to talk to. Then it reached my work. My boss, Ethan Cole, called me into his office. His tone was careful. He said someone had reached out, asking questions about whether I was stable, whether I was handling my responsibilities. He said he didn't believe it, but he needed to ask. That was the moment it stopped being about family. It was about my life. I told him I was fine, that I had always been fine, that whatever he had heard didn't come from me. He nodded, but something shifted. Not doubt, awareness. That night, Daniel and I sat at our kitchen table and decided what came next. No arguments, no second guessing. We moved out of the city a few months later. I focused on my work. He grew his business. Slowly, things became quiet again. Peaceful. The silence from my family stopped feeling strange. Until 3 days ago. I stood there now, back in my kitchen, the present catching up with me. The letter was still on the table, the tackle box was still open, and for the first time since that night, I realized something had come full circle. They had tried to control the story then. Now they were trying again. I turned back toward the counter, my eyes settling on the envelope inside the box. Whatever was in there, it wasn't just something my grandfather left behind. It was something he had set aside. For me. And this time, I wasn't walking away. Chapter 3. What My Grandfather Knew. The envelope felt heavier than it should have as I slid it out from the bottom of the tackle box, the paper slightly worn at the edges, like it had been handled just enough to matter and then left alone. I turned it over in my hands, noticing there was no name written on it, no label, nothing to explain why it had been tucked away like that. For a moment, I just held it. A thought pressed in, quiet but persistent. What if there's nothing in here? What if this is just another thing I made bigger than it is? My fingers tightened slightly. Then I opened it. The first thing that slipped out wasn't a letter. It was a document, thick, official, folded neatly. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes catching on words I recognized before my mind could fully process them. Irrevocable trust. Lake Lure property. Recorded in 2015. I stopped breathing for a second. Then I found my name. Beneficiary. Elowen Hartley. I read it again, slower this time, forcing myself to understand every line. The property had been transferred into the trust years before my grandfather passed. It had never gone through probate. It had never legally belonged to my father. My grip on the paper loosened slightly as something settled in my chest. Not shock, not disbelief. Clarity. Beneath the document was a second sheet, thinner, folded once. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My grandfather's. I unfolded it carefully, my fingers slower now. The message was simple, just like him. He said the house was mine. He said he knew things wouldn't always be fair. He said my father wouldn't always see clearly when it came to Meredith. He said this wasn't about choosing sides. It was about making sure I had something that couldn't be taken from me. At the bottom, he wrote that he trusted me to know when I needed it. I didn't realize I was crying until I had to blink to see the words clearly again. Not from pain, from something else. For the first time in a long time, I felt like someone had understood me without me having to explain anything. I sat there, the letter resting lightly in my hands, the room quiet around me. Then, reality caught up. Because this wasn't just emotional, this was legal. I reached for my phone and searched the name printed at the bottom of the document. Thomas Calloway, estate attorney. Still practicing. I hesitated for a moment, then dialed. It rang longer than I expected before a voice picked up. Older, steady, the kind that didn't rush. I gave my name. There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. Then he said he had been expecting my call eventually. I frowned slightly, shifting in my chair. I'm sorry, what do you mean by that? He let out a quiet breath, not impatient, just measured. Your grandfather was very clear when he set everything up. He wanted this kept private unless you came looking for it yourself. I glanced down at the papers again. So you knew? I knew the trust existed, yes, but I was instructed not to contact you unless you initiated it. That made sense in a way that felt very much like him. Quiet, careful, thought through. I asked him if the document was still valid. It is. It was recorded properly, and it hasn't been contested. The property is held by the trust, and you are the sole beneficiary. I leaned back slightly, letting that settle. So, my father never owned it? No, not legally. The word landed harder than I expected. Not legally. I let out a slow breath. What happens if someone tries to sell it anyway? There was a brief pause. They wouldn't be able to complete a legal sale without your authorization. Any attempt to do so would be stopped once the title is reviewed. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Has anyone contacted you about it? No, you're the first. That told me everything I needed to know. When I hung up, I placed my phone on the table carefully, my thoughts already moving ahead. Because now, the letter from Brennan and Doyle looked completely different. They weren't just asking me to sign, they were assuming I didn't know. My phone buzzed against the table, pulling me back. Rachel. I hadn't heard from her directly in a while, but she was one of the few who never fully disappeared. I answered. Her voice came through quickly, like she had been waiting. You got something in the mail, didn't you? I sat up a little straighter. How do you know that? Because things are getting bad over here, worse than anyone is saying. I stayed quiet, letting her continue. Meredith's store isn't just struggling, Elowen. It's falling apart. Vendors are calling, inventory is stuck, and she's behind on payments. I closed my eyes briefly. How bad? Rachel hesitated, then said it anyway. Over 200,000. The number sat heavy in the air between us. And your dad's already stepped in. He refinanced his house a few months ago to keep things going. That explained the urgency. Then she added something else. They already have a buyer lined up for the lakehouse, someone local, over 400,000. Everything aligned in that moment. The timing, the pressure, the assumption that I would sign without asking questions. How long have they been planning this? I don't know exactly, but it's not new. They've been talking about selling for a while. That part hit differently because it meant this wasn't desperation. It was strategy. I thanked her quietly and ended the call, the silence in the room returning, but now sharper, more focused. I spread the documents out in front of me, reading them again, slower, more deliberately. Every line made sense. Every detail held. The trust wasn't a last-minute decision. It was something my grandfather had thought through carefully. He hadn't just left me something. He had protected it. Protected me. A memory surfaced, quiet and steady. My grandfather standing by the lake telling me that strength didn't have to be loud to be real, that the right decision was usually the one that didn't need to be forced. I looked back at the letter from Brennan and Doyle, then at the trust documents. They thought I was walking into that office to sign something. They thought I didn't know. They thought they were ahead of me. I gathered the papers carefully, stacking them in order, sliding them back into the envelope, but not sealing it, not hiding it, not anymore. My reflection caught faintly in the kitchen window. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see someone trying to keep things from breaking. I saw someone who understood exactly what was happening and exactly what needed to happen next. I reached for my keys, the decision already settling into place. This wasn't about going back. It was about finishing something that should have ended a long time ago. And this time, I was going to walk into that room knowing exactly what they didn't. Chapter 4. The Meeting They Didn't Expect. I parked a block away from the office and sat in the car for a minute longer than I needed to, my hands resting on the steering wheel, my eyes fixed on the glass building ahead. Nothing about it looked unusual. Just another law office in downtown Asheville, clean lines, neutral tones, the kind of place where decisions get made quietly and permanently. I picked up the envelope from the passenger seat, feeling the weight of the documents inside, then stepped out of the car. The walk to the entrance felt shorter than it should have. Or maybe I just wasn't hesitating anymore. Inside, the air was cool, controlled, the receptionist looking up with a practiced smile. I gave my name. She nodded like she had been expecting me. "Mr. Brennan is ready for you." Of course he was. She led me down a hallway lined with closed doors, then stopped at one near the end and knocked lightly before opening it. The room was already occupied. My father was sitting at the table, leaning back slightly, one hand resting on the arm of his chair like he had settled into a position he expected to hold. Meredith sat beside him, her posture tight, her expression carefully neutral, though I could see the tension in the way her fingers were clasped together. Across from them sat Richard Brennan, a folder open in front of him, his attention shifting toward me as I entered. All three of them turned at the same time. For a second, no one spoke. Then my father gave a small nod, like I had just arrived where I was supposed to be. Elowen. I didn't respond to the tone. I walked to the empty chair across from them and sat down, placing my envelope on the table in front of me, but not opening it yet. Brennan cleared his throat slightly, his voice measured. Thank you for coming in. I believe you received the document regarding the Lake Lure property. I did. He nodded, sliding a paper slightly forward. We're simply looking to finalize the transfer so the sale can proceed without complication. The word simply almost made me smile. My father leaned forward a little. This doesn't need to be difficult. I looked at him, really looked at him, noticing the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the tension in his jaw. You're asking me to give up any claim I might have on a property you say I don't even care about. He didn't hesitate. Exactly. There it was. Clean, direct, certain. I let a small breath out. Not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. You're right about one thing. He leaned back again, confident. I didn't go back to that house. I paused just long enough for the silence to settle. Because the last time I was there, you insulted my husband in front of everyone. Meredith shifted slightly in her chair. My father's expression tightened. This isn't about that. It is for me. Brennan glanced between us, his attention sharpening slightly. My father shook his head. You're holding on to things that don't matter. This is business. I held his gaze. You're the one who made it that way. Meredith finally spoke, her voice quieter than I expected. Elowen, we don't have time for this. We just need you to sign so we can move forward. There was an edge under her words, something tighter than frustration. Pressure. I looked at her. For what? She blinked. For the sale. For the house. No. For what? She didn't answer immediately. My father stepped in. You know exactly what this is for. We're trying to resolve a situation. That word again. Resolve. Like it was temporary, like it would fix itself if I just cooperated. I leaned back slightly, my hands resting loosely on the table. You're not resolving anything. You're trying to survive your own mistake. The room went quiet. Brennan's pen stopped moving. Meredith's eyes snapped toward me. My father's expression shifted, just for a second, something cracking beneath the surface before it settled again. You don't know what you're talking about. I didn't argue. I reached forward, opened the envelope, and slid the documents out on the table, so Brennan could see them first. He leaned in slightly, his eyes moving across the page, scanning, then slowing, then stopping. The change was immediate. Subtle, but unmistakable. His posture straightened, his expression sharpened. He picked up the document, reading more carefully now. No one else spoke. My father looked at him, waiting. What is that? Brennan didn't answer right away. He turned another page, then another, his focus narrowing. Meredith glanced between them, her fingers tightening. Richard. My father's voice carried a warning now. Brennan finally looked up. Where did you get this? I met his gaze. It was left to me. He looked back down at the document, then at my father. This property is held in an irrevocable trust. The words landed slowly, like they needed time to settle. My father frowned a little. What does that mean? It means the property is not in your name. It hasn't been since it was transferred into the trust. Silence filled the room. Meredith shook her head slightly. That doesn't make sense. It was always Grandpa's house. It went to Dad. Brennan's voice stayed calm. "It did not go through probate. It was transferred before your grandfather passed. Legally, it does not belong to your father." I watched the moment it registered. Not fully, not completely, but enough. My father's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. "That's not possible." "It is documented, recorded, and binding." Brennan set the paper down carefully. "Any sale would require authorization from the beneficiary." He looked at me. My father followed his gaze, his expression no longer controlled. "Elowen." It wasn't my name the way he said it before. It was something else now, something uncertain. "You're saying you own the house?" I held his gaze, steady. "I'm saying you never did." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before. Meredith leaned back slightly, her face draining of color. "This is some kind of mistake." "It's not." My father stood up abruptly, the movement sharp. "This doesn't change anything. We can fix this." Brennan didn't move. "There is nothing to fix. The ownership is clear." My father looked at him, then back at me, searching for something that wasn't there anymore. "You're going to sign anyway." It wasn't a question. It was a habit. I shook my head once. "No." The words settled into the room with a finality I hadn't felt before. No anger, no hesitation, just no. Brennan closed the folder in front of him slowly, his expression neutral now, professional. "I would advise against proceeding with any sale discussions until this matter is fully addressed." My father didn't respond. He was still looking at me, trying to understand how something he had assumed for years had shifted in a single moment. Meredith leaned back slightly, her composure slipping. The room felt smaller now, tighter, like everything that had been certain when I walked in had been quietly taken apart. I gathered my documents, sliding them back into the envelope, my movements calm, deliberate. No one tried to stop me. No one told me to wait. I stood up, the chair moving back softly against the floor. For a second, I looked at them, at the people who had spent years deciding who I was supposed to be, and I realized something simple. They had never actually known. I turned and walked toward the door, the sound of my footsteps steady, the space behind me silent. This time, I didn't feel like I was leaving. I felt like I had finally arrived. Chapter 5. What They Lost and What I Kept. The strange thing about winning is that it doesn't always feel loud. There was no one running after me in the hallway, no apology catching in someone's throat at the last second, no dramatic moment where everything I had waited years to hear finally showed up all at once. I walked out of Brennan's office, stepped into the Asheville afternoon, and for the first time in a long time, everything inside me felt still. Not empty, not numb, just steady. I called Thomas Calloway before I even got to my car. He picked up quickly, like he had been expecting to hear from me. I met with them. And? It's done. They know. There was a pause, then a quiet understanding in his voice. He said he would move forward immediately. Formal notices, documentation, everything clear and undeniable. He explained it the way people like him always do. Calm and precise, like facts didn't need emotion to be real. I thanked him and hung up, sitting in the driver's seat with my hands resting on the wheel. No shaking, no second guessing, just breathing. When I got home, Daniel was already there. His truck was parked in the driveway, tools still in the back, like he had come straight in and waited. I stepped inside and found him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, watching the door like he had been listening for it. "Well?" I set the envelope down. They never owned it. He didn't react right away, just looked at me, then nodded once, like something had been confirmed, not discovered. And Brennan told them the same thing. A small smile crossed his face. Not big, not dramatic, just real. Good. I stepped into him without thinking, and he held me the way he always did. Steady, grounded, like the world didn't need to spin so fast anymore. The next few days moved quickly, but not in the chaotic way I had expected. Calloway sent out formal notices, first careful, then firmer. The language shifted from polite to precise. The property at Lake Lure was held in irrevocable trust. Any attempt to sell it without authorization would be legally challenged. Continued use without permission would carry consequences. There was no room left for interpretation. Rachel called that Monday evening. "They're not taking it well." I sat down on the couch, Daniel turning down the TV behind me. "How bad?" "Bad enough that Meredith won't stop crying, and your mom keeps saying this is all a misunderstanding." That almost made me laugh. Rachel kept going. My father had tried to argue with Brennan, tried to push, tried to reframe it into something negotiable. But there wasn't anything left to argue. Not when everything was documented. Not when the truth didn't need anyone to defend it. They're leaving the house. When? Like, fast. They left within 2 days. That part stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because I wanted them out, but because I knew what it meant for my father to move that quickly. He had built his life on control, on certainty, on being the one who understood the system better than anyone else in the room. This time, he didn't. Rachel told me Meredith packed like she was fighting something she couldn't see. Cabinets opening and slamming, drawers emptied too fast, things shoved into boxes without care. My mother cried while wrapping dishes, her voice soft, repeating that it wasn't supposed to happen this way. My father said almost nothing. That's how I knew it was real. 3 weeks later, Velvet Thread closed. I didn't hear it from Meredith. I didn't hear it from my parents. I saw it. Daniel and I were driving through downtown when I caught sight of the storefront. The lights were off, the display empty, and Meredith was outside peeling the gold lettering from the glass with both hands. Slow, careful, like she was trying not to break anything else. She looked different. Not softer, not kinder, just smaller. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I kept driving. My father's fall was quieter. At the bank, people started asking questions. Not directly at first, just enough to shift the way they looked at him, enough to make conversations shorter, less certain. He didn't lose his job, not right away, but something changed. When people stop assuming you're right, they start noticing when you're not. My mother felt it in other ways, at church, at the places where she had always been the center of things, where her voice carried weight. People asked about me, asked how I was doing, asked why we hadn't spoken. The story she had been telling for 2 years didn't hold up the way it used to. She couldn't control the room anymore. Work came back around too. A few weeks after everything settled, Ethan called me into his office again. He closed the door, sat down, and looked at me like he had something he needed to say. "You handled everything better than most people would have." I didn't respond right away. He continued. The promotion that had been delayed was back on the table. The hesitation was gone. He asked if I was still interested in leading the regional financial review. Yes. Good. That was it. No long explanation, no apology dressed up as something else, just clarity. A few people reached out after that. Aunt Linda called. She cried, said she should have said something that Christmas, that she knew the moment my mother started speaking in that quiet, careful tone that something wasn't right. Marcus sent a message one night saying he always felt like there were 2 versions of our family, the one everyone showed and the one everyone survived. He wasn't wrong. Not everyone came back. Some stayed silent, some chose the version of the story that made them more comfortable. I let them. I was done trying to convince people to see what they didn't want to see. About a month later, I drove out to Lake Lure alone. The road felt the same. The turns, the trees, the way the house appeared all at once when you got close enough. It hadn't changed. The door opened easily. Inside, it still smelled of wood and water and time. I walked through every room slowly, not looking for anything, just being there. Later, Daniel came up with tools, fixed a few things that needed fixing, and made the place feel lived in again. We sat on the floor that first night with takeout and paper cups, and somewhere in the middle of that, I realized I hadn't thought about my family all day. That mattered more than anything else. A few weeks later, I wrote them a letter. Not through a lawyer, not through anyone else, just me. I told them the house would stay where it is. I told them I wouldn't sell it. I told them if there was ever going to be anything between us again, it wouldn't start with money or pressure or rewriting what had happened. It would start with honesty. I didn't ask for a response. I didn't promise anything. I just told the truth. Daniel read it before I sent it, nodded once, and handed it back to me. That's you. I mailed it the next morning and didn't wait for an answer. Some things don't need one. The real ending came on a quiet afternoon at the lake. I was sitting on the dock, my feet just above the water, holding my grandfather's fishing rod, the same one he used to let me borrow when I was a kid. The house behind me was quiet. Daniel was inside, moving around, the soft sound of a cabinet closing somewhere in the distance. The water didn't move much. Neither did I. I thought about everything that had happened, about being the strong one, about how often that really meant being the one who adjusted, who stayed quiet, who made things easier for everyone else. I don't think that anymore. Strength isn't about carrying everything. It's about knowing when to put it down. I kept the house. But more than that, I kept myself. And if you've ever been the one people only remembered when they needed something, or the one who got called difficult the moment you stopped saying yes, then you probably understand why this mattered. Let me know if you've ever had to draw that line for yourself, and stay with me if you want to hear more stories like this.